Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Legal Insights webinar run by Kaizen Synergy Law Firm. My name is Nihal Samara. I'm the General Counsel and Legal Director here at Kaizen Synergy Law Firm, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's session. Today's session focuses on the governance, risk, and compliance obligations for community service organisations. Over the next few weeks, we are going to be running a series of specific webinars, really designed to give you what I'll say, the nuts and bolts of your compliance obligations, specifically your legal compliance obligations as a community service organisation. Today's session focuses on cybersecurity and what the requirements are for your agency. As always, we'd like to pay our respects to the elders past and present upon the lands on which we all meet. While this session is being run by webinar and recorded all the way up to the question and answer part of the session, we do pay our respects to the traditional owners accordingly. So as I mentioned, today's agenda really focuses on the cybersecurity obligations. We are going to give you access to the Gemba 360 dashboard to allow you to conduct a self-assessment and access the legal resources that we're showing you today, as well as legal policy templates. And that is something that you will get access to after today's live session if you don't already have it. We are also going to review the governance standards and ensure that your agency knows what those are, and also cover off specific questions that you might have as well too. If you do have any questions after today's live session, by all means, please reach out to us directly on the mobile number listed here. You can also reach our support desk on the 1300 360 360, or you can email us directly at support@gemba360.com. So that said, the resources straight up of what you do have access to. First of all, let me walk you through this so that you know where to go and where to access this information. So if you go into your Gemba 360 dashboard, let me just bring this up to show you how to get there. All of you will get access to these legal resources. You can go and access it via our website. We will also give you the direct link, which will bring up this screen here. It's a big blue button. And if you simply go to gemba360.com, which you can see that up here, and use your email address, and we will send you some temporary login details, and it'll take you into this screen here. A couple of resources that you have access to, and I will repeat and show you and access throughout today's session. One is the governance, risk, and legal compliance or self-assessment tool. This is located here on the left-hand corner of the screen. When you click on that, it will bring up this screen here, and we will be going through the cybersecurity requirements that you need to meet as well. If you do have any questions, you can use our support desk here and access these resources. These are resources I'm showing you that you will all get access to in order to support your agency. The other part is I will show you a policy template, and again, you can access this by simply clicking on the Gemba Docs button, going into the policy and procedures template and policy and procedures form, and it'll actually bring up all of your policy documents. What we have loaded in there for you to access is actually what we call the data management email document, and you will see that there is information that's directly here for you to be able to access. And it is a policy template that you can view across this as well too. So that said, let's go back to the session and cover off what your agency needs to meet and also what your obligations are. So to start off with, the governance standards really drive what specific compliance obligations you have within your agency. And that is something that you need to be aware of and also comply with. Essentially, there are a number of different regulators that we can see here. This includes the ACNC, ORIC, ASIC, and privacy commissioners as well too, and also key legislation in each state and territory that you need to be across. Essentially, from a legislative compliance point of view, there has been recent changes, even over the last couple of years. Back in 2021, the Parliament passed which essentially commenced on the 23rd of January 2022, which essentially changed the safety of requirements for agency. And that includes things like addressing harmful conduct for things like cybersecurity and cyber abuse, as well as setting up an independent regulator around e-safety, which can require the removal of adult cyber abuse material if it is satisfied that the material is posted with the likely intention of causing serious harm. It also means that also there are specific protections for children as well too, with now the e-safety now having the power to issue removal notices to a full range of online services, not just social media. But what we also need to consider really is the requirements under corporate governance as well too. Now, this is where it can actually get very, very confusing very, very quickly. And a lot of agencies, and specifically community service organizations, look at the cybersecurity requirements and just look at this and go, I don't know actually where to start. As a community service organization, there are key requirements under directors' duties and obligations that you might have, whether you are registered under the ACNC or as an Indigenous corporation under the Office of the Regulator for Indigenous Corporations as well too. Essentially, when we're talking of cybersecurity, there are a number of similarities across this. Now, on this, there are also obligations that agencies need to meet, specifically in terms of directors' and officers' duties. Now, when we go through and have a look at some of the governance standards, and this covers off some of the requirements under what I'll say is the Indigenous corporations, this is specifically under ORIC. There is the obligations for things like self-monitoring, management of internal disputes. There's a whole range of broad governance applications, and this equally applies to agencies registered under the ACNC as well too. And we can see that again, there's clear governance obligations. When I say clear, there are large banner type of obligations that you need to meet. There are 6 in total, some of which we've spoken about last week. And it covers off things like compliance with Australian laws, accountability to members, purposes and not-for-profit nature must all be consistent. Now, when you go in and actually have a look at what this actually means, and we have 4 and 5, which includes suitability of responsible people and duties of responsible people and what this means, agencies look at these and go, well, what does this actually mean for us? If we're going to look at specific cybersecurity obligations, what does this actually look like and what does this actually mean? Now, there is and we have, as I mentioned, and we do acknowledge ORIC, the ACNC and ASIC as well too, where some of this information we're showing you in these slides actually has been taken directly from different websites regarding the regulators. And again, we purposely do this so that we're not reinventing the wheel and also providing timely advice to yourselves as well too. Now, some of the key areas that regulatory agencies are looking at is these 4 areas here. And we will be covering off each one of these 4 areas over the next 4 weeks as well too. Today's one is on cybersecurity. And when we look at cybersecurity and what the obligations actually are, well, we can go in and let me just bring this up. Here we are here. Under cybersecurity rules, what all of you need to look at is essentially this. It says all charities, according to the regulators, All charities are vulnerable to cybersecurity risks, including unauthorized access to information, hacking, data breaches, viruses, and phishing. Recognizing issues of cybersecurity and how they may affect operations is crucial for charities. It is just as important that charities know how to best mitigate the risks of cybersecurity and can address issues that arise. Now, once you look at that statement of what the obligations are, agencies then turn and say, well, what does that actually mean? And how can we actually show that we actually meet this? What and where is the line in the sand that we actually need to meet? So what we have done is taken, if I go back to your dashboard, what we have done, here it is here. And as I said, you all do have access to this as well too. And we will be sending out, I can see a few questions coming up. We will be sending out the login details for yourselves to access. Now, what you can do is simply go to this checklist here. And what we have done quite simply is look at the governance, risk and compliance obligations. We have taken what the ACNC directly says, plus the other regulators as well, and we've put these into specific headings. Now, from a checklist point of view, we've answered this yes or no, and then allowed you to put in comments. So it's a self-assessment tool that allows you to actually go down and review each of these items. And these items are, when I say clear, they're clear in what they expect. So has your agency got clear policies, guidelines, and procedures for cybersecurity issues? Arranges training for all staff and volunteers on cybersecurity and privacy issues, conducts self-assessment, has a clear plan, uses antivirus software to protect devices, regularly updates its antivirus software, protects information, regularly backs up information, and seeks help from cybersecurity issues as well. Now, I will add, we are a signature as a law firm and providing this online service with GEMBA. We are a member of the Joint Cybersecurity Council as well too, or Cybersecurity Centres as they're called, the JSCSs. And essentially we do get feeds from the Commonwealth on key issues to advise agencies like yourselves. Now, on this, essentially, this is the checklist for your agency to be able to clear and to demonstrate that do you have a direction or a policy that shows what this essentially is and what do you need to meet in terms of this obligation. Now, what we have done as part of this legal webinar is to also give you access in the GEMBA docs under the policies area, access to your own policy template that meets these requirements. Now, if I bring this up and show you this, and we're going to just go through this part by part. So I've just opened up the cybersecurity policy. Here it is here. You have the access to it by quite simply, if you wanted to, and let me just bring this up for you, you will see that we've actually put in here down the bottom, I'll just highlight it here, it says my agency name. So you can essentially go in and download this and access this policy, and it'll give you a baseline policy of what you need to cover. What we have looked at across this is each of your specific obligations. Here they are here listed. And if I go back directly to the self-assessment checklist that ACNC need you to look at, and all the other regulators as well too. And what you can essentially see is the items here. Each one of these items cover off the policy area that you need to follow up. So has clear policies for issuing cybersecurity. Well, this is the policy that you can use. Arranges training for all staff and volunteers on privacy issues, conduct self-assessment, and what plans you have. Now, as part of this policy document, what we have looked at is the relevant legislation. We've looked at what confidential data actually is. And if I bring this up as well too, and I'll just make this to one page for you to be able to view. And let's just zoom in a little bit for you as well too. And I'll just make this to 100%. So we're seeing this. So essentially what you've got is the policy template that we'll just go through now as part of this. And we've got the cybersecurity standards that your agency needs to meet. We're looking at what is the confidential data that you need to manage as well too. How and what is the general purposes in protecting company information, as well as what information you need and what are the general standards. It also talks about how often you should actually update your antivirus software as well too, and what the general ISO standards are, as well as keeping email safe and passwords for you to be able to manage. Again, these are all the obligations that agencies in the community services sector are expected to follow. I've just had a couple of questions saying, what happens if our standards is in fact higher than this? Absolutely. If there was specific measures that you had, for example, then you can actually remove this. There's no need to actually keep it. So, for example, you can actually, it is a Word document, and you are able to change this as you need to. The idea of this also is in terms of additional measures, what you actually need to do in terms of staff that are working remotely as well too, and what you need to follow in terms of your obligations. In terms of disciplinary action, again, this is a big issue that agencies have. One of the things that we do find out when looking at the cybersecurity standards, the legal compliance standards, is essentially where do we actually have disciplinary action for staff that do not follow what we actually are expected to see here. Well, essentially, again, we've looked at the fair work obligations, and if staff or volunteers that you may have that support your agency don't actually follow this disciplinary action, then essentially what we do expect you to do is follow this policy. So essentially, you've got the minimum obligations that your agency should be following in terms of their obligations. Now, also in terms of document retention, and this is something that I just wanted to drill down into a little bit further. And we have ensured, and again, what we have noticed is that under the governance standards, actually this is something that is not covered. So let me just go back to the governance standards, and it talks about essentially having clear policies and procedures or guidelines for collecting and handling of information. But what it doesn't tell you is, well, what is the expectations of this? Now, we have put into this policy, and I am working off this policy because it is a lot simpler to show you some of the requirements rather than just on a PowerPoint slide. So essentially in Victoria, for example, there is the new, the New Crimes Act, but essentially this was a crime, the legislation under the Crimes Act was changed a number of years ago. It is now a statutory offence to destroy, conceal, or render illegible such a document, or to expressly or implied authorize someone to do so that may lead to legal proceedings. So you can imagine how broad that could be. In some circumstances, documents have been found to include things on, if we're talking of purely electronic information, things on not only computers or emails, but also things on mobile phones, on disks or portable USB drives as well too, have all been found to actually be requirements under the Crimes Act, where you must actually have a policy and enforce it by staff to ensure that they don't unknowingly destroy something, or directors essentially authorize, whether expressly or otherwise, ensure that people don't just destroy information that's actually kept in electronic forms. This actually represents quite a high watermark for obligations, and that's just in Victoria. What we are finding in other states, for example, in New South Wales, we've covered off. In Queensland, we've covered off as well too. In South Australia, Tasmania, and Western Australia as well too. So essentially what you're finding is that in different states, there are equally different legislation, which essentially creates a statutory obligation on destruction and concealing of information that your agency holds under what I'll call a cybersecurity policy. And we find that specifically in New South Wales under the Crimes Act, again, it is an offence to suppress, conceal or destroy anything that may be required as evidence in any judicial proceeding. Similarly, in Queensland, we have a similar under the Criminal Code. In Tasmania, it's under the Criminal Code, and under South Australia and Western Australia, similarly, about willfully destroying any information. So how do you, in fact, manage this within your agency? Well, what we have set up is describing it as essentially into 5 different categories. And this is material that's of a permanent nature, administrative or general correspondence, but essentially applying what we call a 7-year rule from the date of last use. And essentially, this covers off a lot of the agency information that you have. Where it then comes into it is then how do you actually record this information? And that's where we've actually covered this off within the policy document itself. The last part of the policy that we've also covered off is around digital signatures for your agency. Now, I have had a few questions from a couple of agencies simply asking what happens if obviously we don't work in Victoria or Queensland. Well, quite simply, you can actually go in and delete the relevant section that you want that doesn't apply to you as well too. Or if you only do work, if your agency only does work in Victoria, for example, then quite simply you can simply scroll down and delete the rest that you see here. And you've got a policy, a template policy that's specific to your space as well. So essentially what we do have for you, and this is how we're going to set up the next few weeks, is to give you clear policy documents and clear assessment tools for each of the sections. In each of these areas, you can keep notes. If you do have questions, you can certainly come back to us by clicking on this little pop-up, and this will connect you directly to our support desk as well. For those of you that are using Gemba for the first time, you'll see that we've also got different sections that you can then save this, and you can come back to it as you need to, and it'll make your life a lot easier from a compliance obligations point of view. Next week, we are actually going to be walking you through some of the other specific requirements that your agencies need to look at. This will include the other specific compliance, governance, risk and compliance obligations. These will cover off, when I bring up these topics, financial abuse, working with partners and safeguarding vulnerable people as well too. And it certainly is in there for you to be able to access. And we will be covering off even down to risk registers, how you manage this within your community services organisation. As I mentioned at the start of this session, by all means, have a look at the resources that are there. You can use a self-assessment tool for your agency to assess where you're currently at as well too, and use it to keep notes as you need to. If you do have any questions, I'm more than happy to stay online and answer these before we finish off. I can see a few questions coming through already. If you are watching this recording after today's live session, then by all means reach out to us on 1300 360 360, or you can email us at support@gemba360.com.